Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Preem, Eric Scopel, Jared Mack on today's Monday show. The Ducks fresh off a victory over USC, turning the page to Arizona State, but Sunday morning, Sunday night, the coaching carousel has started. Texas A&M fired Jimbo Fisher, Will Arnett at Mississippi State, not Michigan State, excuse me. He has been fired as well as of Monday morning.
Zach Arnett, right?
Yeah, sorry.
You said Will, like the actor.
I love Arrett's development.
Love Will Arnett, great actor, but
but he's not fired.
No. Well, I hope not. At least need him on those.
And I'm assuming like this is gonna kind of dominate the week, as stupid as it is gonna be. It is what it is, but there's a lot to get to with this one. I think we have a wide range of questions on the mailbag.
We really do. And we are just going to start right where Matt was talking with a question from @DrewGoalie, who asks, how concerned should Oregon fans be about Dan Lanning ending up at Texas A&M, #AutzenAudibles? Figured we just start there, address it. To Matt's point, this could be something that we're talking about for a while, or we're recording this Monday morning. Dan speaks later today, 6:45 p.m. He might come out and address it right away. I'm sure he will be asked about some of this stuff. I don't know if I really buy into the veracity of these rumors or the sources of some of these names that are pushing him the most aggressively, at least right now. I'm also not naive enough to think that like an Oregon coach wouldn't leave for another job because we've been through this a couple of times. I just don't think this one makes the most sense, but I also remember being in Las Vegas with Matt a day before the Pac-12 Championship in 2021, feeling kind of like, oh yeah, Mario's not going anywhere. And then shortly after that game, it became very clear he wasn't. So I'll let you guys answer this as well, but I think we're probably all kind of on similar footing where Dan has said so many things so definitively about wanting to be here, raising a family. He says all the right things. This feels different, but I guess I've also never asked him specifically like, hey, what's your thought on the Texas A&M Aggies? Do you like that job? So I would be naive to just suggest there's no chance this happens, but it really, to me, doesn't make a lot of sense for several reasons, which we can get into if we want.
Yeah, part of me feels like we're a broken record. I feel like we've said this about Mario and we said it about Willie Taggart. And we said this last year with Dan and the Auburn rumors, although I didn't really think that those were legitimate rumors. Where it's like he says the right thing. Obviously, he doesn't I feel confident that he won't leave. And then the coach is gone in 72 hours or something like that. I don't expect that to happen. Here I am being the broken record. I agree with Eric. I don't see the obvious perks of joining the Texas A&M team or program or university if you're Dan Lanning, other than the dollar sign amount. And that's okay. I think everybody who is listening to this podcast or on this podcast would take a job that pays them 2 to 3 to 4 times as much as what they make at their current job. And it gives them all the control in the world. For Dan and this theoretical Texas A&M position, I would imagine they offer a contract even bigger than what Jimbo's was, because money is literally no object to Texas A&M. And they have as deep a pockets as anybody in the country. I don't think that Dan would leave. I agree to the point where he's settling in his family. He's talked about that a couple times where he doesn't want to move his kids. They've already moved so much during their life, and now they're here at Oregon. They feel rooted to the community and all the good things you want to hear that I do actually tend to believe him on. It's just going to be a more legitimate rumor than what Auburn was last season. I know Dan last year commented on the Auburn rumor and shut it all down. Oregon did the good job this offseason of extending Dan and making his buyout bigger. I know that the buyout is a lot to some schools. It's not a lot to Texas A&M if they were to really go after Dan. And if I'm Dan, I'm just trying to leverage this into a bigger contract with Oregon because I think he can do that pretty easily if they come with actual numbers. But I look at it as a legitimate rumor. Just because of Texas A&M's firepower compared to Auburn last season. But I don't expect Dan to be going anywhere.
I went back and pulled the quote that he provided in the press release when he was extended back in July. And the very first thing he talks about is the long-term commitment to being not only the coach at Oregon, but being a community member of the Eugene area. In coaching, your dream to be at a place where you can both raise your family and win at a high level. Oregon has more than exceeded those expectations for my wife, Sophia, and our 3 boys. And this will ensure our boys can all graduate from the same school as we continue to grow roots in the community. He has made it very clear, like Jared said, multiple times, that they have moved a ton in the last 7 to 10 years of his coaching career, and that he has been looking for a place to settle down and start their family, essentially, in a community, in one place. And that was I'm like you. You have to be aware that Oregon's been burned twice in a row by coaches saying they're committed to Oregon and then they leave. But I also think that this one feels different. Lanning has made a commitment to not only like putting himself into the public eye, but like doing things in the community outside of the public eye and being committed to his kids growing here and growing up here and the family spreading their roots. And those are things I don't think we've saw, Mario Cristobal just out about in the community if it wasn't some kind of Oregon football related thing. Willie Taggart wasn't here long enough to even try and do that. Maybe I'm being naive, but like I have zero fear that Lanning goes to this particular job. This one, like A&M hasn't won in ages. It's a place where coaches go to die. I think they've fired their last 4 or 5 coaches. They've had like 1 10-win season in the last 20 years. Their top 5 finishes aren't good. And to Jared's point, like, and it's okay if that's the case, but like you go and take this job because you ultimately just want to get paid boatloads of cash. And I just don't think, while money is a factor for Dan, he's also made it very clear multiple times that there are things beyond just getting paid a lot of money that he's looking for, and Oregon checks those boxes. So I don't fear this at all.
Let me just, I got 2 things and then we can move on. Because again, I don't want to spend 20 minutes talking about something that Dan might shoot down in 9 hours, and just say that's not happening. The other thing, first off, for Texas A&M, like if Oregon actually makes the college football playoff, this is one of the first things I thought about. We know Dan's history pretty clearly with what he wants to do in terms of being loyal to the school he's at. And with Georgia, he hung around through the end of it. Do you really think he's going to take a job while potentially playing for a national championship and be coaching? You know what I mean? Like, I don't see that being something he wants to do if that's still alive. And that means that Texas A&M's theoretically waiting until like mid-January, which I don't think they're willing to do. So the timeline thing kind of gets shady. And then the money part, I think like that ends up being kind of neutralized a little bit, just because Jared and I were talking about this last night, and the comparison I drove is like, I don't doubt Texas A&M has more money, but like Phil Knight to me kind of neutralizes some of that, because like if you've got 2 really, really rich people, and even if one has twice as much money as the other rich person, you're not using like 90% of your resources to hire this coach. Like, unless they're resetting the market and making Dan paid like $20 million a year, which I just don't expect to be the case, then I don't see how money ends up being the factor, because Phil Knight can match these massive overtures. Like if they're saying, Dan's making, what is he making now? Is it like 4.5, 5? I forget what the new number was.
New number is 7. It's like 645.
That's right. So if so, that's even more. So like, what's the number
Right.
that A&M has to hit where Oregon doesn't match? Is it 15, 16 million? Like, does it get to that point? I don't know. We're talking about a couple of rich, and this is to Jared's point, where like maybe Dan just ends up cleaning up here, and you got 2 really, really rich donor bases competing over you, where neither wants to say, I'm not continuing the bid. Because I mean, Phil Knight has to have a pretty clear idea of what Dan provides the program. Like, Dan has some leverage here if he wants to get paid huge. And the question comes that comes down to where does he think he can be most successful trying to win a national championship with his actual aim. And to Matt's point, like recent history would suggest it's Oregon. So this is something I'm sure we'll talk about a lot, maybe, or we won't be talking about it all. So who knows? This might be something that's this one podcast segment to start the show, or this might be something that's on our lips a lot over the next couple of weeks. I hope it's not the latter, just because coaching searches from our perspective might get a lot of page views, but they're not a whole lot of fun to cover. It's just nonstop, kind of wears you down. So we'll see what happens. Any other thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just brought up the money thing because, like, like Jimbo's buyout is $77 or $78 million. They got to pay him $19.2 million in the next 60 days and then $7.2 million every single year until 2031 to not coach. Most schools would be deterred by that and probably not go out and spend a lot of money on a new head coach. And I'm not saying A&M is going to go spend a lot of money on Dan, but I feel fairly confident in saying that they are going to spend a lot of money on whoever the new coach is. So I just wanted to bring that up because it's just like a different world of money for A&M compared to like Oregon will usually have the advantage over most Pac-12 schools because of Phil Knight and because of their donors. But Texas A&M money will be, it'll be exactly what Eric is. It'll be like a net neutralizer. Like there's no amount of money that Phil Knight probably wouldn't pay to keep Dan, and the same with what Texas A&M would offer Dan in this hypothetical scenario. So I just want to bring that up as like a kind of like a neutral point of like, well, this is probably something different than what Oregon is used to in dealing with. Because I would expect Phil Knight to go above and beyond because that's exactly what he did for Mario. He offered him 10 years and $85 million. He took 86, I think, at Miami. Like that's, $1 million at that point doesn't mean anything. Like if A&M was going to offer him a big contract, I would almost all but guarantee that Oregon also offers him the same contract. Just depends who he says no to.
Exactly. Oregon would lose a bidding war to A&M. They're not going to win that. Yeah, and it's one of the few schools that would happen. And if Dan is in the I want as much money as I possibly could get mode, more power to you. It's hard to say no to that.
A&M's the place.
Yeah, and it's just not the vibe that we've gotten from him in the times that he's spoken in front of a podium or when we've been around him at other media events and he's talked about just Eugene. Like that's just not money is not, it doesn't feel like the end goal for him, like the most amount of money. Like he wants to get paid, no doubt, but it doesn't feel like that's the ultimate driver for him.
I just would be curious to see how much A&M would actually, what the number is where Oregon doesn't match and how high does that go? I mean, legitimately, because like Oregon has some pockets too. And obviously I'm not suggesting A&M, it doesn't have more, but I made this like comparison to like if two billionaires are bidding over a yacht, like they're not actually bidding their net worth. So whoever has the most doesn't necessarily win. It's just who's willing to say no faster, or you know what I mean? And to me, like, I don't think Phil wants to say no. So I would just be surprised if they get outbid, but that might mean he becomes extremely wealthy if this actually gets very far. So who knows?
Do we think Dan does get a raise out of this? Like, because
I would try if I'm him.
I mean, his agent definitely wants to.
Yeah, right. I would agree.
But, I mean, I guess I'm asking it from an Oregon perspective because they've already rewarded him handsomely. And technically still hasn't won a league championship yet. Still hasn't technically won a major bowl game yet. And he's 0-3 against your biggest rivals this season or in his 2 years. And you can argue that those teams are good, and that's true, but like still lost. And he lost because of coaching errors by both games against Washington. And they lost in embarrassing fashion against Oregon State. Not trying to say like he's a bad coach because I think he's going to be an elite coach, but he hasn't become that level yet from a results-oriented business. And like I don't know. I don't know what Oregon does and what Rob Mullins does because they've already rewarded him handsomely already once this season, and it might be a case where if they don't get to the Pac-12, if they don't get to the college football playoffs, and they go to the Fiesta Bowl and they win that, maybe it's just status quo. But if they do get to the playoffs, maybe you bump it up a little bit. I don't know, but it's not. I at least I don't look at this as Dan is not like a top 3 coach in the country right now.
No,
and he shouldn't be paid like it either, which is what A&M's money is going to be probably putting it at.
Yeah,
right.
which is why it gets kind of weird. But
yeah.
I mean, we'll see. I mean, 'cause my point is, I think you get like a couple of really rich billionaires who are kind of like arm wrestling over a guy, and it just becomes who says no first. And if and for Dan, that could be a very good thing. This is a good situation for his bankroll. But to your point, Matt, I don't know. Like, what is the number? Because
I don't think Oregon's gonna have a choice. If Texas A&M really goes hard after Dan, they're not gonna have a choice, and they will have to put Dan into the $9 to $10 million a year range, bare minimum. Because I mean, shoot, man, A&M's going to be paying more than Dan Lanning makes a year to Jimbo, just not to coach. So money, again, no object to them. But yeah, no, if they go hard after Dan and make him an offer he cannot refuse, it's probably somewhere like 12, 120. Because they gave 10.95 to Jimbo, and that was 3 years ago. So got to adjust for inflation here a little bit, and then offer some sweeteners on top of it to say no to Oregon and say no to them, because that's going to be a hard thing to do. If again, for those listening or watching, if they go all in on the Dan Lanning assault, so we'll see. Should be fun.
Should be a blast.
Mm-hmm.
The message board is going to be fun if this actually picks up. I don't think any of us are really super concerned right now, but we are very much aware of what's being said out there, and I think you should be too. But I wouldn't sweat it until
fun to go through the exercise too.
What's that?
Fun to go through the exercise as well.
It is.
Talk it all out.
I agree. All right, let's move on. A question from AnimalMan623. Love the handle. Is field goal kicking a problem for the Ducks now? Yes. Hard to argue it's not. I just say it again. Camden Lewis, great young man. Love talking with him, but we have to talk about performance, and the performance hasn't been good recently. And it is to me a little surprising because I went back and I just was looking through his career, and obviously everybody remembers the start and the struggles he had his first year, and then he has the high moment of the game winner against Washington State, but he also has a bunch of misses, and then the next year he actually loses his job to Henry Cattleman, and everybody kind of writes him off, expects him to transfer, and then it's this great redemption arc where he goes, I've got it written down here, 33 of 38 over the last 2 and about a quarter seasons, which looking through the NCAA, it's kind of hard to figure out everybody who's been kicking at that same time, but I think he's one of the top 3 most accurate kickers over that span. If you were to just try to I did my best to boil it down, but I think he's during that span, he was like very few guys were better. And then the last half of the season, the last 6 games, he's 3 of 8. And the misses have been kind of woeful at times. And it's been consistently missing. And it's been mixed in with kicking the ball out of bounds, which speaks to him probably not kicking the ball cleanly either. So,
right.
It's 5 missed field goals. It's 5 kicks out of bounds in 6 weeks. That's really not acceptable, to be just point blank. And I don't think anybody on the staff would disagree with that, just from that base metric of like, hey, if your kicker was doing this, would you say that's good? No. The average kick, by the way, 44.4 yards. I did the math earlier. He's missed kicks of 38, 43, 47, 53, and 41. Kicks over 45, I can kind of get behind, that's probably pushing his range. Underneath that, missing 38, 43, 41, this most recent one, those are kicks you should expect to make. And the problem here becomes, how does that impact how does this impact Camden? Does he ever recover? Does he come back and start making these kicks? And B, does the staff still have confidence that he will? And that's the part where I start wondering. I mean, they've done a good job, to Dan's credit or to his detriment, of continuing to trot him out there in these situations. They haven't backed away from it. He's kicked 8 field goals in 6 weeks, right? So they're not saying, hey, we don't trust you, we're not going to kick field goals, we're going to go for it every time. And we know Dan likes to go for it on 4th. But I just wonder if you get to a point here, maybe we've already gotten pretty close to reaching it, where you go, maybe we're just a go for it until we get within the 20-yard line team. Like, we don't really trust Camden to kick anything further than 40 yards. And if you look through his career stats too, it kind of holds up. Like, even the 5 misses he's had during that's 2.5 or 2.25 seasons where he was really successful, the misses he had were longer kicks. So yeah, I just thought I'd provide the data. You guys can build off of it. I think we're probably all pretty much in agreement, though, that this has reached a point that I don't know if it's critical mass, but it's certainly very, very concerning.
It's certainly concerning. I remember weeks ago I brought up that I was more concerned about the kickoffs because I thought that was more detrimental to the team. I still somewhat feel that way, just because I think Oregon's going to be aggressive regardless. But 38% from field goals in the last 6 games is not ideal. And that'd be great if somebody shot 38% from 3, but that's a failure sport. Especially from 3-point land. It's like baseball. It's a failure sport. Field goal kicking should not be a failure sport. And Camden has proven in years past to be really good at points. It just hasn't been recently. And these have been bad misses too. I think that's the problem, is that, except for the Washington, the last one where he missed the potential overtime kick, a lot of these haven't really even been close to going in. And just off the foot, you're like, well, okay. And if you're listening at home, I'd like to ask you a question. When Camden trots on the field nowadays at 41 yards, what's your confidence level? Is it any different than what it was in the COVID season? Because I feel like that's kind of the state of the union right now of the confidence in Camden Lewis. And again, it's sad that we have to have this discussion because Camden's a good kid and one of the funner, more fun players to talk to onto the team, and just a good overall human being. And what is, I think, his final season at the University of Oregon. It sucks, but it's a legitimate problem, and they need to figure out if Grant Meters is ready to go, because you cannot have kicks out of bounds. You cannot have these field goals that aren't even close. And Grant Meters is one of the best kickers in the country coming into the season as a high school senior. And we've seen him sparingly. But if he is a legitimate option, I think we should see him during the games and see what he has. Because right now, Camden is not looking great.
There's not much more for me to say here because I'm in agreement. Like, it's a concern. I said a couple weeks ago when Eric brought up the question, I think it was the UW game, that I said moving forward, he probably shouldn't kick anywhere inside of or outside of 40 yards. 39 and in is probably the level, but now he's missed one inside of that. I think if it's a reasonable 4th down and distance situation, you should be going for it, unless it's basically a chip shot like he had at Texas Tech. It sucks. He's a good dude. He's a good person. He's gone through a lot. He got himself back, and then he's got the yips now, and it's come at the most inopportune time.
Yeah, just last thought on it. The weird part of this is he's, I believe, now 5 points from becoming the school's all-time point scoring leader, surpassing Royce Freeman. And it feels weird because now we're talking about whether or not he should have his job when he's in that spot. So I don't think, Dan and their staff is, I doubt, worried too much about whether or not they want to bench the guy who's going to break the school record soon. I think they'll just do whatever is best. Like, as he said, they're not, they are process driven. And if the process is Camden's not our best kicker, they'll go a different route. But it is an interesting dynamic too, when you kind of include that, where he's probably a couple made kicks this weekend against Arizona State. If he keeps his job, I think he will. We'll see. Maybe we'll come out there on practice on Tuesday and they'll show us something different. I doubt it, because we don't get to see much anyway. But that part I just want to throw into the end of the conversation of, like, he's actually really close to passing Royce Freeman to become the school's all-time point scoring leader, which is and kind of a weird wrench to the whole conversation as well. All right, last one before we hit a break here from @MichaelSayer87. What are your realistic expectations for our defense against Arizona State when they face a similar offense every week in practice? #Autzen Audibles. Figured we'd do a little bit of talk about this game coming up since we're all so fired up about it, right? ASU, like, kind of sneaky, got a little win there last week against UCLA. I didn't really see that one coming. Did it in the Rose Bowl. I went and watched the highlights last night. And that was part of why I wanted to include this question, because I wanted to just do a little pre-scout. Did you guys watch some of the formations and weird stuff Arizona State's doing on offense?
He pulled everything out of YouTube, all the crazy plays.
It is wild.
They're wild.
Formations. I mean, they had running backs, tight ends taking snaps as quarterbacks and then actually throwing the ball. They had a running back throw like a seam route for a 30-yard touchdown out of
Scatterboo, right?
Scatterboo, yeah.
Yeah.
That's normal. They've done that with Scatterboo.
Yeah, Borgay was hurt too against UCLA. Yeah. And they had to put
He played most of the game, but yeah,
he did correct. Yeah, but he got hurt towards the end and they put Scatterboo like strictly as a Wildcat quarterback, but really like a quarterback Wildcat. It was very strange.
Yeah, and then they played Jalen Conyers, which is their top tight end also, and he threw a pass downfield that actually kind of sealed the game because it drew a pass interference call on a 4th down. Again, like a Wildcat formation where they're actually the quarterback is not, you expect them typically just to run it, and they're actually throwing it, and not just throwing like a wide open pass, but like balls downfield. And then this was the one that was also interesting because, again, maybe you guys have seen more ASU recently. I haven't watched them probably, honestly, since Pine was injured. Like this weird formation where they have the center and like 2 shield guys next to him, and then they have like 5 offensive linemen on one side and with the receiver and like a couple offensive linemen on the other, like a completely unbalanced formation. I bring all this up to say it might be similar, like a base formation and a lot of base stuff to what Oregon does, but Arizona State's going to make you prepare for some really, really weird shit. Like just point blank.
Yeah,
like
100%.
Kenny is getting very creative, and I understand why. Like they're on quarterback 3, basically almost quarterback 4, depending upon the health of their quarterback. I know he has an ankle injury, but they're just throwing the kitchen sink at people and trying to manufacture anything they can. And there was enough to beat UCLA, but UCLA was also down its top 2 quarterbacks and didn't play a very, very good game at all. So, but to the original question, what are my expectations? I think Oregon's defense will do a pretty darn good job. Arizona State is last in the Pac-12 in scoring offense, averaging about 17 points per game. Oregon's defense is just about as good as UCLA, maybe better, and UCLA still held them to 17 points with one of those touchdowns being a running back throwing a seam route down the field. So I feel realistic expectations. Arizona State scores fewer than their season average, 10 points maybe, but Kenny's going to make you prepare for a lot of different stuff, and he's going to throw the kitchen sink at you.
Yeah, and he, like you said, he has to because he doesn't have any options. This is not and Kenny Dillingham, we all had a lot of fun watching him at Oregon because he would throw out these wrinkles every once in a while, and it'd be fun. But sometimes it wasn't so fun. But he now has control of his own program, and he can do whatever the hell he wants down there. And it's honestly a lot of fun to go and watch that team because, boy, some of the stuff he comes up with is really strange, but also really cool. There's going to be those moments against Arizona State on Saturday where the Sun Devils are going to run some trickeration, and it's going to work. It's going to be, I don't know, 15 to 30-yard gain. And you're going to feel like the house is caving in around you because it's kind of sad that, like, oh, this trick play where Scatterboo is taking over a quarterback and throws a pass for 25 yards. Like, that should never happen. Oregon will be fine. I mean, this is a damn good defense. They can play as conservative as they'd like, and that might not be a bad idea with all these trickerations and just trying to, play sound defense and like a zone coverage idea more than man, just so you don't get lost. Maybe that's their plan. Maybe it's not. Maybe they're just going to do what they normally do. There's nobody on this ASU team to be afraid of if you're Oregon, and especially after going against Lincoln Riley and Caleb Williams. There's nobody on this team to be afraid of. But Cameron Scatterboo, future New England Patriot, easily, 100%. My Lord, Bill Belichick's like probably his long lost son. Need him in New England.
You guys do need a quarterback.
Yeah, I'm wrong. First round pick.
He's 11th in the conference in yards from scrimmage this season, so he's a good player, and he's got an extra year of eligibility if he wants to come back. I'd be curious though if he graduates, does he use the second time transfer portal move? As for the question, zero fear. This is the worst offense in the conference. I guess the fear is that you're playing a coach who is literally playing with house money in Kenny Dillingham. They can't go to a bowl game. They're not bowl eligible, even if they were. They've dealt with a ton of injuries, and he's kind of entered the epic mode of the season and is like drawing up plays from all over the place, doing funky things just because they can, seeing if they work. And if they don't, who cares? Sorry, we have a whole bunch of injuries and we're not bowl eligible anyway. So I'm trying to keep, do whatever I can to make this team competitive. And I will say, like, it's impressive that he has gotten this team to play hard, even though they've gone through stretches where they've lost a lot of games really close. They have been competitive, and they knew from the jump they weren't ever going to a bowl game. And that's pretty impressive for Kenny Dillingham. So, like, Oregon should dominate this game. They should win by a lot. It should be very similar to what the California end result was a couple weeks ago. And it should be a game in which you would hope that you could rest some players either the entire game because of injury, like Bucky Irving, or maybe your corners who got hurt last week against USC. Mm-hmm. Or maybe the more likely scenario is those guys play, but they play limited snaps and their day is done as quickly as the game is over, whether that be at halftime or the start of the fourth quarter. It would be a bad day for Oregon if the guys that are dealing with some kind of injury are having to play until the clock hits 0 on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree. Not much else to say. And you hope you can get those guys healthy, in part because Oregon State the following week, that game could mean a lot.
Pretty important. Yeah.
So we'll see.
I was going to say how frisky ASU has been in the Pac-12. Like, other than the loss to Utah, I think their biggest margin of defeat was 14, and that was to USC in week 4. I mean, lost to Cal by 3, lost to Colorado by 3, lost to Washington by 8, Washington State 9. Obviously, they beat UCLA and Washington State. They're a frisky team. They're not going to be fun to play if you're Oregon. But I don't. Good teams in the Pac-12 win in the desert in November, and Oregon is a good Pac-12 team this year. So I would expect them to not. I mean, I don't think they're going to roll them like Utah did, because that was just ridiculous. But I expect a pretty handful win here.
And to put context on the Utah game too, that they were Arizona State's Borgay got knocked out. They brought in, I think it's Conover, who I'm not overly familiar with his work, but I know his box score line was like 5 for 22 for 40 yards.
They gained like less than 100 yards in the day.
Yeah, that was one where Kenny probably didn't really have any alternatives to kind of pull out of the bag there. Now you've got a quarterback who, again, if he's 5 for 22 for 40 yards and a pick, he's probably not someone you can really game plan around, especially on the fly. So
they have 4 quarterbacks who have attempted 38 or more passes this season. Like it's just been a revolving door for them because injury. Guys get hurt or guys haven't been productive. And that doesn't account for Scatterboo having 8 attempts already this season. And then now, as Eric said earlier, like Conyers, the tight end, has moved over to playing some version of a quarterback for them at times. And they only have 7 touchdown passes all year.
Yeah.
They have as many passers as touchdown passes almost. Like that's the word for it.
Yeah. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll finish up the mailbag. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles mailbag. A couple questions left to go, centered around who knows what, because I forgot what the questions were.
Matt, come on, you got to keep up. You're in our Slack channel. All right, fourth run from @GoDucks85. This might be kind of quick. I know we need to take this one game at a time and not look too far ahead, but for the sake of being straightforward, with no tiebreakers, and this are some scenarios he throws out for this weekend. If Oregon beats ASU, Washington beats Oregon State, and Utah beats Arizona, won't Oregon clinch a spot in the Pac-12 title against Washington? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. I just wanted to start the week by pointing this out. I don't even know if we need to do much discussion, but that is exactly accurate. If that were to be the case, Washington would have no losses, Oregon would have 1 loss, and everybody else would have at least 3 losses going into the final weekend. So there would never be a tiebreaker because even if Oregon lost to Oregon State, they would still have fewer losses than the Beavers. So those things happen. Book your ticket. Book those flights to Vegas. Get those tickets purchased. Get ready. I think I already know some people in my life that have already taken those steps. Hopefully they're not too early on that. But yeah, I think that's how it plays out. Oregon beats ASU. Washington beats Oregon State. Utah beats Arizona. And by the way, that would be quite a parlay there if you were going to try to make a bet, because I think those are probably pretty decent odds that all those happen. The least likely probably being the well, actually, Arizona's pretty frisky, and that's a home game. So I don't know. Maybe
pretty good.
Yeah, Arizona could strangely be the weird team that I don't even know what a tiebreaker with Oregon versus Arizona would be. I imagine Oregon would win that, but I don't know because now I'm going best win would be both would have wins over Utah. Anyway, if this scenario takes place, Oregon's fine, and if Oregon wins out, Oregon's fine.
They're also fine,
the actual answer. Yeah. So if Oregon wins all its games, this doesn't even matter. But they could clinch it this weekend if a couple of things break right.
There you have it. That's it. I got nothing.
On we go.
I got nothing. I mean, that's just we're just talking about tiebreakers here. Eric laid it out.
I was hoping you were going to talk for a second because I'm on the Pac-12 site trying to find the
well, I can filibuster
the tiebreaker rules because I know there are tiebreaker rules somewhere on the site. I just can't.
Yeah, I have no idea what those are.
All
sure. I know is that if you score more points than the other team, you will win and move on. So
yes,
as far as tiebreakers go for me, that's all I know.
I thought it was head-to-head was 1, and then number 2 was win over the best team.
Top team. They would be 0 right.
But
so I guess that would be wins over Oregon State.
Yeah.
If Oregon were to win against Oregon State.
Arizona would have the tiebreaker then because it would get to Oregon State and Oregon would have lost to OSU. And
yeah. That'd be
Arizona
fun.
beat them.
They sure did.
So root for the Utes and root for the Huskies this weekend if you're an Oregon fan. I know it pains people to say that for the second part, but that's over Oregon State, and I don't think Oregon fans like that team very much either, so it's probably not too difficult. You still want a time to look that up, Matt, or are we good?
No.
If you
wait, found it.
He's got it.
Here we go.
2-team tie. If 2 teams are tied for first place, they'll compete in the championship, obviously. If there's not a tie for first place, but the 2 teams are tied for second place, the 2-team tiebreaker policy will apply, and the winner will be the 2 seed in visiting. That doesn't make any sense.
Pac-12 bylaws.
Winning percentage against the next highest placed common opponent in the standings based on record in all games. You just go down. Win percentage against all common conference opponents is the third one. Combined win percentage in conference games of conference opponents, strength of schedule is the fourth one. The fifth one is total number of wins in a 12-game season. And it ultimately would get down to a coin toss if they were somehow still tied, but that wouldn't happen.
Wow. A coin toss. How electric would that be?
Arizona's lost a non-conference game, so Oregon does have the overall win record. But who cares?
How electric would that be, though?
If it came to, it would be so Pac-12 if it ended that way, and then they should do a full hour-long show, and then it just comes down to a coin toss.
Bring in like a scientist of explaining a coin, how it's not 50-50.
Yeah, it would stop at 2 because if it's Oregon and Arizona and Oregon loses to OSU and Arizona beats Utah and then beats ASU, Oregon would lose out because Arizona beat OSU and Oregon would have lost.
What happens if Washington loses to Oregon State and Washington State?
Ooh.
Well,
Now you're getting crazy, and I don't want to spend the time
keep
trying
dreaming.
to figure all that out.
Okay. We spent probably more time on that than I thought we would, but hey, it's fun. And I really hope at some point we can have a conference championship game determined by a coin toss. I hope Oregon's not one of the teams involved because that would be agonizing. Could you imagine?
We'll see if the Big Ten does that. Maybe there's a little bit of a smarter conference and they have some more
I doubt there's a coin toss option in their bylaws.
Yeah.
I would be surprised. All right.
We'll find out.
One from @Robbie Parness, one of our favorite question askers. Down the stretch of the season, there are positions having their depth tested. He included cornerback and running back. If guys continue to be banged up, who are some players that who will need to step up? Which positions do you think can afford an injury the least? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. And he also said, other than quarterback on the injury front, which is the obvious answer. Because if Bo Nix goes down, we all know this changes dramatically. And maybe Ty Thompson's ready, maybe he's not. We would hopefully, I'm knocking on wood, hopefully that's not a bridge you have to reach at any point soon. I wanted to include this because I do think there's legitimate questions right now at corner with health, because Oregon finished this game with, I don't know if we didn't really mention it on the podcast, we probably should have, but Roderick Pleasant stopped that game from being a one-score game by making a tackle on a 2-point conversion on Brandon Rice, where if he doesn't make that tackle, that's an 8-point game. And I'm not saying that result changes at all, but it could have theoretically been a little bit more stressful at the end. But the fact that he was on the field just spoke to the injuries at corner right now, where you've had Kyrie and Jaleel. I don't think either played any in the second half. You had Dante kind of, I think, out for parts of the fourth quarter too. Those are 3 of your top 5 cornerbacks. And so they finished the game with like Triquez and Nico and Roderick Pleasant. So those would be the 3 names to know that would need to step up if theoretically the other 3 are out. I have no expectation or really like I couldn't even answer with a clear sense of like who is actually how serious these injuries are, because Dan didn't give us any information after the game. But I will say it is not ideal that Kyrie and Jaleel have both had kind of, I don't want to say nagging injuries because these might be different injuries than what they've dealt with before, but we've been through this before. And this is one of the positives at corner, at least, is I'm not going to sit here and say that Oregon has depth that is on par with their starters, but Triquez Bridges was a full-time starter last year, and I still would contend a pretty decent corner. Like, that's not an awful option if you have to go there. Dante Manning, assuming he's healthy, was a former 5-star recruit. Roderick Pleasant, very highly rated recruit. Nico Reed last year at Colorado was an honorable mention all-conference selection, I believe. So, like, you've got some pretty darn good players. And Nico Reed plays a ton in their base formation. He's just playing in the slot primarily. He's not usually on the outside. So, like, I think they're actually better at corner, especially against Arizona State and Oregon State. If these are, like, short-term-ish injuries, neither of those offenses really scare you a ton on the outside. Obviously, you'd like to have your top guys. But if these are long-term injuries, which, again, I don't have any sense of if they are or not, that gets kind of worrisome against Washington, because you saw at the very end of that game what happened when this exact situation played out, where both of those players, both being Kyrie and Jaleel, were out for extended periods of time. So, and then I guess running back depth, Bucky did leave that game with, it looked like, an ankle injury, came back, obviously scored the touchdown, looked good. But if he's limited, you're now looking at a couple of true freshmen, Jaden Lamar and Dante Dowdell. Both guys have played a little bit this season. I think both guys are high upside players down the road, but certainly that's a pretty massive step back to me from what you've got right now.
I think for me, there's 2 very obvious positions. I agree with running back more than cornerback, just because of the depth that they built there. Running back, Bucky obviously is way better than any true freshman. But I do think, again, I'm a running back hater. I do think that Oregon's offense would survive with the group of 3 running backs of James and Lamar and Dowdell. But the obvious positions to me are safety and tight end. I think you have Steve Stevens and Evan Williams right now, Tysheem Johnson as well. And then if one of those deep safeties gets hurt, specifically Steve Stevens, Brian Addison is no longer on the team. You can try to move Kamari Terrell back to safety, although he's been playing a lot of slot, a lot of corner in this fall camp. And then during the season, he's also been injured, so that doesn't help. Suddenly you're relying on Damon David, Cody DeCambra, and Tyler Turner. All three guys who have played very sparingly this season at safety, and especially a deep safety. Maybe they move some guys around, and Tysheem Johnson, and then they all co-inhibit all the safety positions, and they all move around, and they all have cross training everywhere. But right now, it's been the Steve Stevens show at this deep safety position, and Evan Williams at box. So I think that's a position that obviously will need to be addressed in the offseason, considering they're losing maybe 4 players, 4 of their 7, and probably 5 if Damon hits the transfer portal again. But that if somebody goes down there, especially Steve, if he goes down, I have a lot of question marks of who is going to fill in there. And then tight end. Here I am, banging the drum. I'm here. Tight end is a problem. Kenyon Sadiq is the lone backup, and he doesn't play too often. But if Terrence Ferguson or Patrick Herbert or Casey Kelly go down, or God forbid 2 of them, there's not a lot of depth back there.
I feel like even though I like Lamar and Dowdell, if Jordan James or Birch goes down, that's for extended time, that's bad. So I would did I say Birch? I meant
you did, yeah.
Yeah. I meant Jordan James and Bucky Irving. So I would say that would be a concern. I think if Tez or Troy Franklin go down, that's
another one. Yeah.
That is a massive blow to Oregon's offense. Because as we've seen the last few weeks, it's becoming harder and harder for Troy to get the football. He's still really damn good at getting it, but it's becoming harder, which has opened the door for Tez. And if they lose one of those 2 guys, it just eliminates. I think if they lose Troy, it's a huge loss. I think they can kind of scheme their way around if they lose Tez, but it becomes significantly harder. I think defensive line, they're fine. Like, it would suck if Dorless went down with an injury. It would be a horrible bit of news. It would be, you feel terrible for the kid, but they've got the depth, they've got the talent, that they'll be fine. I'm not trying to say he's not a good player, because he's probably their best defensive player, but they have so many guys there. They've rotated so many guys.
Mm-hmm.
They are capable of withstanding that kind of an injury. I think if Jeffrey Bossa goes down with an injury, that linebacker room becomes scary. I know there's a lot of confidence in Justin Jacobs. I know Jamal Hill has played well this season, but I think Bossa's leadership and getting everybody in position is invaluable. You can't put a value on it. He's critical. And then Jared's point, the safeties positions, it's very thin all of a sudden. Felt like they had a lot of options, and now they don't. Strangely enough, like, we've seen Oregon's corners go down before with injuries, and guys have just stepped right up and have filled in the gaps. It would be different if they went into this weekend's game, or maybe a couple weeks against Washington and Vegas, where they don't have Florence, Jackson, and Manning to start the game. That would make it a lot more scary going in. But at least right now, like, if they played ASU and they didn't have those 3 guys, like, it would be a concern, but it wouldn't be my number one. Like, Manning has performed well when asked, Bridges has performed well when asked. Now we've seen Roderick Pleasant. Nico Clem has played a lot in times and has done well. They would be able to withstand another one, but yeah, not Nico Clem, Nico Reed. I'm all over the place this morning.
You're names.
All right, no.
It's been a long weekend, and Matt was coaching a championship flag football game on Sunday, so he was out there. Yeah. Just a couple of spots that we didn't mention that actually I think should be pretty high on this list, and one because we saw it for a glimpse on Saturday where it looked like it might come to fruition, is if Jackson Powers Johnson goes down, you're looking at a true freshman in Iapani Lalalu, who everybody loves. I mean, he's playing a ton of snaps every game. He's basically played 20, 30 snaps every game the whole season. So he's got a lot of or a lot of run, I should say. But that could be potentially tough. And Jackson's played at such a high level. I do think there'd be a decent drop off down to Poncho, who again I think is going to be like a really high end player. And I'm a sneak peek. I'm going to have a feature story on he and his brother Feope coming up here in a couple of weeks and their progress and everything. And but that's one. And then sticking on the offensive line, Oregon's rotated a lot in the inside, and that hasn't even included Nishad Strother or Junior Angulau. I think you feel pretty decent about guard, but we don't really have a great sense of the tackles behind. Like Feope, everybody loves. They say he's a great team player. I know he's been out there in some of these jumbo packages and has done well, but we haven't actually seen him in a game go up against real competition and have to face that. And then George Silva and Kaviko Rogers are like the other two kind of names, and the same answer with those two. Like we've seen even less of them. So I think the offensive line feels deep because you've got a bunch of veteran guards who aren't playing. But I do think at center and then especially at tackle, there's just not bodies we've really seen play a lot there. So I would just include those. But I think I'd agree with where Jared started at safety is probably the spot that would probably be potentially the worst place to lose somebody right now.
What position did we miss? I feel like we hit them all. Long snapper, kicker, punter. What did we miss?
Well, how about a holder or a long snapper? Actually, could get tough. I mean, Camden's having a hard enough time anyway. So
yeah,
that snap's not coming in.
Was it Luke Dzansky? He's the backup long snapper, just for everybody.
From Luke to Luke.
Luke to Luke, yeah. Punter, got two of them. It's probably the deepest position on the team, honestly.
That was such a flex by Dan. We just like Dunn's ability to punt it higher. Like
he should. He punts it higher.
I agree with like we've got Ross is so good, but we just didn't need him because we like the punter today that can kick it higher instead of further.
Yeah, it's probably the deepest position on the team. I don't know what else there could be. Like defensive line, I don't think so. Man.
Defensive line probably is technically deeper than
no. You've like one of the better kickers in the country in Ross James, at least statistically speaking. And then you got Luke Dunn, who's the highest kicking of all the guys.
He's the hang time king.
Hang time king. Yeah, I think we hit all the positions. So
I think
everyone is one to worry about. Just to let you know, Oregon fans.
And it's not. I mean, it's not really that case, but I do think there are spots where it would be a much steeper decline than others, and clearly we've outlined every single position. I don't even know if we really gave an answer aside from telling you that every single answer would have concern.
Pick one position. Let's all just pick one position.
I'd say center, honestly, just because I just it would be stressful to have a true freshman touching the football every single down, and you get into some of these big games like that. That would be a little scary to me.
Safety.
Okay. I'm on safety. All right. That's going to do it for us here on the Autzen Audibles podcast. Thank you for submitting your questions. We'll be back on Tuesday with a recap of what Dan said Monday night, plus player recap. Wednesday, Chris Cartman from Sun Devil Source will be on the show as well. And then Thursday, we'll make our predictions. But until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.